The town I grew up in was founded in the 1800s and is nestled in between two mountain ranges and backed against the Angeles National Forest. Our town has water, trees, and fertile soil. Because of the abundance in natural resources, it was zoned for agriculture and husbandry, allowing for ranchers and farmers to settle the area. In the 1900s, the ranchers started selling their land and suburbs were built in their place. There were also wealthy people who moved in and built their estates, but that was a very small percentage. By the 40s, when my grandparents moved in, the neighborhood was comprised of working class men, their stay at home wives, and the demographic was predominantly Caucasian. In the 70s, the freeway was built, and around the same time, the public schools gained a reputation for being quote unquote good, and upper middle class individuals started moving in and building slightly larger homes. Fast forward to the 90s and present, the town now has a great deal of multimillionaires and a few multi-billionaires. They tear down the older homes and build mini palaces in their place. The majority of these people are Caucasian and Korean, but we also have a percentage of Armenians, Persians, Chinese, and an even smaller percentage of blacks and Hispanics. With this shift in economic level, there was a jump in prices for everything in town, including homes, clothing, and food. My grandfather purchased our three-bedroom, two-bathroom home for $5,000. The small clothing boutiques, candy shops, and other family-owned businesses sold their items at prices the local community could afford. Today, my home is now worth closer to $2 million, and the bigger homes down the street are selling for around $5 million, with the estates selling for as much as $14 million. I work menial wage jobs. I could never afford to purchase a home in the community that I grew up in, or any other home, nor can I afford many of the boutique shop prices in town. After 3 generations of living here, the town is now pushing us out of it. This is the same for the majority of people I grew up with, even those who are more successful than I am. The individuals who grew up in my town are now moving into places like Highland Park and Eagle Rock, which up until recently were predominantly working class Hispanic neighborhoods, and the cycle repeats itself. The Caucasian population that grew up in towns like mine can no longer afford to live in the same town as their parents, so they must move to an affordable and often minority neighborhood. The Hispanics of Highland Park built that city. Multiple generations of families live there, but now they're being forced out. Rent prices for stores have soared, forcing the local shop owners out of business, so they can't afford their homes anymore, and so are pushed out of the neighborhood entirely. This is the same thing that happened in my hometown. What takes its place is so expensive that others in the community must go elsewhere for their products as well, or if they pay rent, they may have to move altogether. The resentment they feel towards middle-class white people moving in is the same resentment I feel towards the upper middle-class people who pushed me out of my home. Along with the economic changes that gentrification causes, there tends to also be a cultural clash as well, creating tensions between socio-economic classes, which also leads to racial tension. Lately, I've been seeing shows like She's Gotta Have It and the Black Panther movie, which called the white man a colonizer, where it's always the mean white people who move into a minority neighborhood, start jacking up the prices, and calling the police to enforce rules that previously the cops overlooked because nobody was being harmed and nobody cared. I'm currently dating somebody who was born and raised in working class Highland Park. He and others I've met are very resentful of gentrification, which I understand completely. However, because they have never lived anywhere else and don't see the larger game at play, they automatically assume their plight is along racial lines. Gentrification is not racial, it's just a byproduct of our current economic system. They're not moving in because they want to take over minority neighborhoods and push minorities out of the way. They're moving in because they are pushed out of their own neighborhoods themselves, and lower income neighborhoods are all they can afford now. Once there, they want to recreate the neighborhoods they grew up in, and so we see the culture clash and rise in prices. I've noticed the same culture clash in my upper middle class hometown. Like I said earlier, the town was originally a ranch and is zoned for agriculture. As a child, I could walk up and down the street where I could see horses, goats, pigs, chickens. One family even had a donkey and all kinds of farm animals. And my mom said that when she was growing up, trucks full of hay and carrots would drive up and down the streets selling to the locals to feed their animals. Over time, however, the people who own those animals have been taken over by wealthy people who seemingly hate nature. I recently learned that farm animals are no longer allowed in my town because the newer, wealthier people raised hell over it. I no longer see horses or any animals anywhere at all. These same individuals paved over the streams, cut down the trees, and put up cement walls. Everything I loved about my hometown is everything that's being taken out of it one by one. So when I hear lower income people and families discontent with gentrification, I completely understand. It's like your home is being transformed in front of your eyes and you are powerless to say or do anything about it. It's not fair. But because of my situation living in a wealthy town, people ask me why I'm upset. They say just sell the house for 2 million and get a larger one somewhere else. I say because I was born there and it is my birthright to occupy the land upon which I was born. And more importantly, the land I was born on is a treasure trove. I practically have an orchard and mini farm in my backyard. The fertile soil and readily available water source in a desert environment is worth substantially more than 2 million fiat-based monopoly money. Although increasing the value of the town on a commercial level, the actions of these new people moving in are ultimately stripping the land of her wealth, thus lowering the real-world value of it. My home is only worth 2 million so long as the dollar still has a perceived value. When the dollar ultimately collapses, which it will, I promise you that 2 million in monopoly money will be worth absolutely nothing. At that time, my food and water source will be from the earth, and I am lucky that my mother lives where she does. Just as multimillionaires moved into my neighborhood, got rid of our homes, shops, animals, landscape, and even creating new laws banning us from activities which we were engaging in long before they ever moved in, these new yuppies, predominantly middle-class Caucasians, are moving into lower-income minority neighborhoods and doing the exact same thing which was done to them. Gentrification is not racial. This is a product of our economic system. My town is considered prime real estate because of its proximity to downtown Los Angeles and the quote-unquote good schools. Once wealthy people started moving in, it was an upswing. Wealthier and wealthier people keep moving in. Conversely, poor neighborhoods do the opposite. The people, for reasons I have explained in other videos, have less and less work opportunities, thus more crime. Because the children of those neighborhoods are always struggling with external forces, they tend to do worse in school. Thus, the schools get a bad reputation, which continues to lower the value of the community. But all of these factors are based in the fictional game of commerce. Under natural law, whomever lives on wealthy land is the wealthiest person. I am wealthy not because of the fiat currency in my bank account, but because the land I live on can produce food and water. Under our current way of life, those who can successfully subjugate the people who live on wealthy land are the ones who have become the wealthiest people. This is the exact opposite of our natural law model. I'm not saying that business-minded people are evil. These personality types are necessary to the survival of the whole. However, our current system allows these individuals to take over at an extreme rate and cost. There are no more checks and balances, and those closer to the top of the pyramid can't see the mess that they're helping to create yet because they have yet to reap the consequences of their lifestyle choices and ideologies. And nobody likes it when I say this, but everybody is held accountable. If not for quote-unquote poor people upholding those same lifestyle choices and ideologies, this situation wouldn't be happening anyways. Like I said in my video about the housing market, if you want an even playing field, you must first base your economy on something of tangible and intrinsic value as much as possible. Our Federal Reserve notes are based in money of account, which is nothing more than ink on paper. This leaves our economy vulnerable to runaway inflation, forcing people to exploit the earth needlessly, which is why there is so much waste. When basing the economy in something concrete or even trade, which is also concrete, this forces people to live in reality. There will be no more runaway inflation and no more needless outsourcing. So how do we change from money of account back to money of exchange, which is what we had before 1933? At this point, it will be difficult because the federal government went bankrupt. Moreover, in 1933, they took our gold and property through registrations. thus bankrupting the American nationals as well. Private American nationals were separate from the public federal government before 1933. When the feds went bankrupt, that was their personal bankruptcy, which had nothing to do with us. When they asked our ancestors for their gold and property, that made the feds indebted to the American national, thus making nationals the creditors and the feds debtors. However, the feds did one clever thing, which prevented nationals from calling in the debts. They then gave us an application through our birth certificate to become American citizens. Citizens are considered employees to the federal government and therefore a part of the bankrupt federal state. By becoming citizens, this boxed us out of asking for our money back, which we can legally, lawfully, and rightfully do as nationals. It was my personal decision to stop contracting with the feds and become a national, or sovereign. As a national, I can then call in the debts that the feds owe myself and ancestors. But because the feds are still bankrupt, they don't have money to pay me with. So instead, as a creditor, I am entitled to collecting federal assets. These assets include homes, cars, and land property. I am entitled to as many assets as were taken from me. If everybody did this, then it would collapse this current economic model and make way for a new one. And if we're smart, then the new one would be based in something of intrinsic value. This will allow for true equality, thus stopping or at least slowing down the rate of gentrification and other issues caused by fiat currencies. All that said, sovereignty isn't easy. You will only get back as much as you defend, which means you will be learning the law for the rest of your life. If not enough people change course in time, I feel we will become more trapped and impoverished than we already are now. I don't remember the name, but I believe it's called Agenda 21, where the powers that be are trying to condense the people into megacities, where everybody is living on top of each other in a socialist society, where all are allocated a minimum amount of resources. You can see this in movies like Mute and both Blade Runners. Our fiat-based economy forces people out of their homelands and to another area seemingly voluntarily. I went to university at Humboldt State. The community was a logging town, and once there weren't any more trees to harvest, the town pretty much dried up, and the workers had to move to a different town to continue logging. Once resources dried up there too, they moved again, and so on. Back in the day, there was a similar practice amongst slaves. When slave labor is needed in an area, the slaves are packed up and sent over. Nowadays, instead of being sent against one's will, the economy is set up in such a way as to indirectly force low-wage workers to move on their own volition. It's the same practice, just a different way of going about it. All of this is a product of commerce, not a product of nature. When there's nothing left to be extracted in an area, one of two things will happen. If it's a prime location, like the neighborhood I grew up in, you will see gentrification. If it's in a rural area where there's quote-unquote nothing around, you will see ghost towns. The people of these towns will either move to another rural area rich in resources where they can continue their slave work, or they will move to a megacity where they most likely will become servants. Under our natural law model, once again, if you live on wealthy land, you're a wealthy community, and you know this, which is why you go to great lengths in preserving the land and thus your wealth. Nowadays, if you live on wealthy land, you're forced into devaluing and exploiting your wealth, giving it away to others who pay you in monopoly money. Once your natural resources, and thus wealth, is completely depleted, you must now leave your land behind, whereas the businessman you sold it to gets to remain in his suburb and takes business trips to the next rural town where he does the exact same thing all over again. Until we get off of our fiat-based economy, gentrification and skyrocketing housing and product costs will continue.